speak about this topic, it will be metrics on the institutional level. And it will be connected to performance-based funding of research institutions, which I know is an issue here in Estonia. It is also so in the Scandinavian countries. So I will give a kind of European overview, a tour of Europe in 40 minutes. And we will also have time to go to Australia, in fact. And then this presentation will then enlighten some questions around metrics that can be good for discussion, I think. So I will first present the principles of performance-based funding of research institutions. And then I will go through what I call the evaluation-based models. And Henk already mentioned two of the countries that have them, Italy and the UK. And then I will go through the indicator-based models that are present in several other countries. And I will talk about how bibliometrics is used in these two different types of funding models. And then I will conclude about the general trends from a European perspective. And if I have time at last, I will use one example of a funding model that is practiced in not only my own country, but also in the neighboring countries and some other countries, because this was evaluated recently, and some of the problems and discussions, of course, came up in connection with that evaluation. But first, about performance-based funding in itself. So we have the dual funding system that I think you know very well. There's a stream of funding for research going directly to the institutions, the basic funding for research there, and then there's another stream of funding going through competitive projects and programs evaluations, and research evaluations is performed there. And the traditional model on the left-hand side here is, of course, that peers are looking at proposals, and there's research evaluation. And if metrics are used, it is mostly to inform the peer review only. But on the right-hand side, we have a situation where more and more countries during the last 2 decades have been introducing performance-based funding of the direct funding of institutions. Some of them by using peer review, others by using indicators. And then there's a discussion in all countries what should be the balance between the two streams, and that is important for what methods you use, and also the mix between performance-based and political strategic, other types of funding. The share of funding that is performance-based is very large, as we heard in the UK. It is very small in the Scandinavian countries, so there are differences here. And then, should we use the same aims methods? Are the aims the same, and should the methods be the same, and what would be the effects on either side? And so the discussion of indicator-based versus evaluation-based, and also the mix that you questioned, is on that level. So, up to the left you see an illustration of the peer review, and then there I just exemplified two possible metric data sources. It's the international citation indexes, but you can also use for this purpose the National Research Information System. Now, in evaluation-based models, the metric information from these types of data sources are presented for the peer review, and they are used to inform the evaluation. And then the evaluation results that come in grades, with the example from the UK we heard about, are translated into funding. In the indicator-based models, the metrics are translated more directly into funding. And these metrics are often combined with other indicators such as external funding, number of PhD degrees, and so on. So these are the two basic models that I will talk about going around in our European tour. And you see here the blue and red, the indicator-based versus the evaluation-based. Norway is then an example of an indicated model. Estonia has 2 marks here because I know that you have an indicator-based model, but you are also discussing perhaps to have combination with an evaluation-based model. I don't know if this is correct, but I think going through the other countries might be useful in this overview for this discussion. And there are, of course, countries that I know of. I don't know of the situation in all over Europe, but I know of the situation in the Netherlands and in Switzerland, and they do not use performance-based funding of the institutions, at least not explicitly. So there's a situation where the funding comes, and there are some calculations in the ministries, but they are not made explicit. So it is as if the funding comes by itself. Now to the evaluation-based models. First, the overview. The first evaluation-based model was introduced in the UK in 1986. It has been going on for several years with 6 to 7, 8 years intervals. And the first one in Italy was introduced in 2003. And then Australia moved from an indicator-based model to an evaluation-based model in 2010. I'll return to Australia later on. And then this year, the Czech Republic and Sweden, they do have indicator-based models presently, but they are this year trying to develop evaluation-based models. There's not a political decision yet to implement them, but the development work is done this year. And of course, in such small countries, there will be, if it is implemented, international peer review. The peers will come mostly from other countries, unlike the situation in the UK. And then Portugal is doing a thorough evaluation this year, but they are also developing an indicator-based model. And then Estonia has an indicator-based model, I believe, but you are discussing a possible combination. Is this correct? Yes. Now, there is, of course, also use of bibliometrics in these evaluation-based models. Although peer review may be primary, bibliometrics is used to inform. And the case of the UK model, where there has been the development in this respect, is interesting. It was called Research Assessment Exercise until 2008. Now it's called the Research Excellence Framework. Now, around 2008 or before 2008, there was a discussion, an open consultation in the UK, where they discussed, is it possible to use metrics instead of, or as a supplement to the peer review? And this discussion came up from the government because they found that the procedures had become very costly, and also that they could see that there was some gaming going on before each evaluation. But they concluded at that time, as we all say when it comes to research assessment, I mean also bibliometricians say this, that if you want to do research evaluation, bibliometrics can only inform and not replace peer review. But this is in the case where the motivation is to do research evaluation. But indicators can be used for other purposes than evaluation. They can, for example, be used for research funding. But in the case where you want to do research assessment, bibliometrics can only inform. So the conclusion in the UK is what everybody in the world would agree on. But it also came because they were mainly looking at citation indicators as representative of bibliometrics. And in that case, you have to use, as you all know, the international data sources. And someone will always say, but we are not covered. So if you come from the social science and humanities, and also from engineering sciences, you can have problems with a model based on citations. So this is one of the reasons why the UK concluded to continue with an evaluation-based model after 2006. Now, so the rule is that evaluation panels may be provided bibliometrics, but they may not use bibliometrics not supplied professionally, and that means that they will not be able to use journal impact factors, like Henk talked about, because journal impact factors will not be supplied by the organization of the evaluation, because we are here down to the evaluation of individual articles. But apart from the exercise this year, there is a committee working on the role of metrics in general in research assessment. So there's still a very large interest in the UK about this question, how to use metrics properly. And this committee has not concluded yet, but it will be exciting to see what they conclude. The new thing in the UK is also that we are asking for societal impact. Can that be measured? I understood you had a discussion about this yesterday, that the politicians would like to see the societal impact measured. Now in the UK so far they found out that it's not easy to measure, but you can document it in case studies. So they submitted, the university submitted almost 7,000 individual stories of impacts, which is a large experiment. It must have been costly, but to the government it was all for free. So they will also have to discuss how to organize this properly next time, I think. We can return to that in this discussion. I must go on. Italy, there is a discussion there also because of the costs. So there are some experts in Italy claiming that it would be better and cheaper to use bibliometrics, at least in the natural science and medicine. But there are others who argue that peer review is not the same as citation indicators, and that for a proper evaluation you'll have to use peer review and basically, and then be informed by bibliometrics. But in reality, as Henk mentioned, bibliometrics is used to translate citation indicators into the grades. So most of these 5 best publications by researchers, if they are not in humanities and social sciences, they will go through a bibliometric machine, and the grades will come out of that. And then the grades will go into the funding. So it's a mixed model. It's in practice, it's both an evaluation-based and a bibliometric indicator-based model. And this is also because of all the costs of running this, of course. And the same is true in Australia. Only properly peer-reviewed are the social sciences and humanities. And then grades are created, but in fact in Australia they have stopped translating the grades into the funding because the outcome of the process was difficult to accept among the institutions. So they used to have an indicator model that drove the funding. Now they have a peer review or an evaluation-based model that does not drive the funding. But it still creates a lot of good information for the research council. Now, these countries, they have the ambition to use full peer review, just only informed by bibliometrics. That is the ambition. But they are, of course, also discussing mixed models, because they will have to see whether it is politically and economically feasible to implement this big ambition. And then there's this discussion here. Now I go to the indicator-based models, of which Estonia is also a part. The first country to introduce an indicator-based model was Australia already in 1990. Every publication counted the same. And then several countries in Eastern Central Europe have introduced indicator-based models. They are different. I don't know them so well. I know the Czech model well because I'm presently engaged in the work of developing an evaluation-based model there. I also know the situation in Sweden well because I'm also engaged there. But of course, what is a motive behind these indicator-based models is that there's this want to see objective data and not only the results of peer review in these countries. And then you are well served for a long time already, but the research portal serves this purpose, an indicator-based model, and as I will show you soon, this is also the situation in the countries where they have indicator-based models. The countries I know best are using very similar models. I will return to that later on. But I will show you some very common features of all these countries that are using indicator-based models. It is then that you may use both international data sources and your national data source and then combine it with other indicators. In Australia, it was found that there was increased publishing in less important journals after they introduced the mechanism. And all the other countries have in different ways responded to that problem when they developed other models. In Sweden and Flanders in the Netherlands, they introduced bibliometric models that were based on Web of Science only and that were using citations. And this was partly a response to the Australian situation because they wanted the indicators to express a kind of quality dimension also. But in both of these countries, there was a big discussion because some fields felt that they were not covered by the model. So there had to be a change both in Sweden and in Flanders. And in Flanders, they made a supplement, a special bibliographic database for the social science and humanities that has been running since 2009. So there's now a balanced representation of all fields. So if publications are not covered in the Web of Science, they will still be covered in the national database. And in Sweden, as I said, they want to change the model, preferably to a peer review-based model. But this is also because they are not very satisfied with the present model because it represents publications in Web of Science only. And for this reason, we have a model in a neighboring country called the Norwegian model in Sweden. And it's actually used by the universities themselves because they lack the complete overview of the publication activities at the universities. What is missing then in the national model is supplemented at the local level using this model of ours that I may have time to return to. So the result is that no country will rely on Web of Science only for their indicator-based models. It has been tried in Sweden, it has been tried in Flanders, but it's not possible since it's about institutional funding. Now, these data sources, they are excellent for several other purposes, of which Henk mentioned several. But for the institutional funding, you need the complete picture from the perspective of the university of the different fields. And that's where the current research information systems come in. And even those countries, the smaller countries that are now moving towards evaluation-based models, they will also use the CRIS systems to inform the panels. So EuroCRIS and the development of CRIS systems has become an even more important factor now in the development of funding models than it seemed to be 10 years ago. And as you can see from this list of meetings, that Tartu, Estonia, was a meeting place 10 years ago, 10 years ago almost. So Estonia has been part of this development for a very long time. Norway has also been very active. So this is becoming an important factor, and in fact, with more and more meetings in the CRIS society, bibliometrics is a meeting place also. So the CRIS systems and the bibliometric ideas are coming together presently. So this is my main point. All systems, whether they are evaluation-based or indicator-based, are now going to rely on CRIS systems. And this is also the reason why it has been discovered as a commercial market. So Converis, which was developed in Germany, has now been bought by Thomson Reuters. And so the current research information system there is integrated and sold together with Web of Science and Insights. The Insights module, which we'll be hearing more about later on today. And the same is happening. Elsevier acquired Pure, a system that was developed in Denmark, and it is now an integrated part of the products from Elsevier on the bibliographic and bibliometric scene. And this means that in these products, the international data will be integrated with the local and national data, which will be more complete. And I think one of the reasons for these two companies to engage in CRIS systems is that they can see that there's a developing market for connected to research funding and research and administration. So CRIS-based bibliometrics, of course, there's a lack of citation indicators, there's a lack of international benchmarks and comparisons so far, and this is then often compensated by the weighting of publication types and channels. I will show you an example soon. But on the positive side, you get comprehensive coverage of disciplines and publication types. So in humanities and social sciences, they feel that they are covered and well represented. You can also register their books. And then these systems, of course, have the correct procedures for relating biographical information about authors and addresses, as we have in Web of Science, to real persons and affiliations, which create then much more powerful data when you want to analyze it. You know the European Research Reference Index for the Humanities, because I think you're using it as part of the funding model here. It used to be with the European Science Foundation, but it was difficult for them to update it from year to year. It was not possible to submit new journals, new ideas for journals to them. So the problem was that it was not dynamic. There was another problem, and that is that the quality tiers were not generally accepted or much disputed, especially in some fields. So the register will now become dynamic. New journals will be included continuously on certain strict criteria, and it will be completed with the rest of the social sciences also. But the quality tiers will not be used anymore. So this means that if you want to use the area, you will decide on the quality tiers yourself if you want to have quality tiers. But you will get a dynamic list with journals which are more critically examined to be included according to these criteria. As you see here, there are more objective criteria than we used before. And with the last two points here, you can see that there's also a requirement that we will not include local journals that is representing only one university. It should be at least on the national level, representing authors from several institutions. And also, it will be required that if the articles are in the national languages, they should be searchable with abstracts in international languages, also the author and address information, which is already done in many humanities social sciences journals already. And this means that there is something happening, there is hope, Hank, because there is agreement of setting standards, at least at the minimal level, for publication procedures. And also, of course, every plus will then be a list of journals where big indexers, Thomson Reuters and Elsevier, may find journals that it might be wise to include. Now, before I think I have time for the Norwegian model also, but before I go on, I will conclude on the general trends, what I see in the European perspective. So, we have all these performance-based funding models, but they are different from country to country. And I think, although research is international, in essence, all these funding models, they have to be designed nationally because there are different national institutional research systems that they have to adopt to. And also, when we go around, I did not mention this, but the purpose of the performance-based funding is often very different at the beginning. In the UK, it was used initially to separate the real research universities from universities that were primarily supposed to do education, higher education. In Norway, it was introduced because there was already performance-based funding of the student activity, the education activity, and there needed to be a balance, so there needed to be some research indicators also. The motive was not to increase the quality of research, because that can be done by other instruments. For example, instruments in the Research Council representing the other funding stream. So there are different national solutions to different national problems or missions of the models. And then the trend is towards more complex and composite performance-based solutions. The countries are learning and adopting methodologies from each other. And this is more seen the last three years than it was before. And then we see very clearly that performance-based funding is very alerting, is very effective, even if it moves only a small share of funding. Researchers get very concerned about it. Even though the funding at the institutional level, there will be a reaction down through the organization. I will return to that. So you don't need to attach much funding to the performance-based model. You will still create effects, positive or negative. Then it's difficult, as Henk also mentioned, to see a clear relation between performance-based funding and the national research performance. There are countries without performance-based funding that are doing quite well. And it's difficult to identify best practice or overall positive and negative effects, I think. And then in Eurometrics, the trend is towards comprehensive data from CRIS systems. And as you can see, the commercial firms are already following up. Okay. The reason why I present this is that it has been introduced in several countries and it has now been evaluated with regard to effects and problems. And I will present those effects and problems to you. I'm not going to be very neutral because I was part of the work we did originally in Norway to create this model. But I tried to be neutral. So I will just present the elements of the model. It's quite simple, so it can be understood by every researcher. It has a definition at the bottom, what publications to include in the funding model. And this definition works across all fields of research. It also works in humanities and social sciences. Then there are three main publication types included. As you can see, articles in journals and series, articles in books, which may also be in the engineering science, the articles in the peer-reviewed conference proceedings, and then books that are scholarly. And then we define what publication channels should be approved for the system. But of course, we also see that not every publication in these channels are scientific or scholarly. So the definition regulates here the intersection between the channel and publication type. And this is just traditional bibliometric methods, but then used on a wider set of publications. And then there is a dynamic record of scientific and scholarly titles, series titles, and scholarly publishers. And this is the kind of model that ERE is now translated into, because all channels can be searched, new channels can be suggested all the time in this register. And ERE will then work as a parallel register for the humanities, social sciences, European-wide. But this is a register not of Norwegian publication channels. It covers all publication channels in the world that Norwegian researchers might publish in. And we have similar registers now in Denmark, in Finland, and they are going to run one in Sweden, and there's also one in Flanders. And Portugal is developing the same. And there's already collaboration and contact among the organizations that run them. And then this is our country search information system. It's similar to your portal. And these are the principles behind them. It would not have been created without the performance-based funding model, but now it runs for several other purposes, as you can see. So, for example, our research council will not ask researchers to submit their publications list anymore. The research council will go into the database. And it is now shared across 3 research sectors, and it's shared by 2 ministries and the research council. So in a way, it represents completely now in Norway the whole public research sector. I just give an example. I think you know this from your own portal. Some publications have affiliations in several organizations. This journal article of mine was co-authored by an author who also works at the University of Bergen and also at the hospital there. So one publication from 3 organizations is registered as one. It's not registered as 3 publications. And in the 2 of these publications, we could import the reference from Web of Science, and it was only my job to validate that they were important into the system. But since I also do other types of research, I could add my humanities publications. I could add an article in an edited volume. Now, my 2 first publications there are examples of collaboration with other authors. But in fact, my 4th publication, which has only 1 author, is also an example of collaboration in humanities, because it's an edited volume that was created through collaboration. So that is how the humanities expose collaboration. And then there's a monograph, and I have time to make a little sidestep, because this book is about a comedy that was written almost 300 years ago by the most well-known Danish author at that time. It's called The Transformed Peasant. It's about a peasant who goes to usually drinks every day, and he gets quite drunk, he falls asleep on a dungeon, and then the landlord finds him, and he's put into the bed of the landlord and made believe that he's the landlord himself. And then the comedy is about everything that happens as long as he's the landlord. So it's a kind of carnival theme, and this author in Denmark borrowed the theme, in fact, from a long novel in Latin that was written in the early 17th century in southern Germany. So that's a quite interesting story. That is not part of my topic here today, so let's return to the topic. In this Norwegian model, there's a separation of the publications, so there are just 2 levels, and in each field, the level 2 will get more credits or points. So there's a normal level, and there's the higher level, and this in fact also works in the humanities social sciences, because at the higher level you can propose or nominate only journals with high international standard, and also scholarly publishers. But I will give you one example from medicine, one field in medicine. As you can see, this is the frequency of articles from Norway in this medical field. And as you can see, our, in a way, local journal, the Scandinavian Journal of Gastroenterology, comes out with most articles. Now, among all those articles, in the field, the committee can appoint a few journals representing about 20% of the publications. That's the limitation. And these journals have to be the most prestigious journals in the field, internationally, from the perspective of all countries. Now, in medicine, of course, they can use in the journal impact factors to rank the journals, but they're only supposed to use it as background information. There's a decision, finally, on what to include. So, if some fields, they have said that, well, there's a very good European journal covering the field, and there's a very good American journal covering the field, and they have about the same impact, and maybe they chose the European journal because they know something about the citation practices among American scientists. So it's not a direct use of impact factor. It's a decision, a proposal. And this proposal will then go to a national board that will look at all the proposals in the fields and coordinate them and make sure that they use the criteria for the nomination. And the reason why it also works in humanities is that it's possible to have this type of statistics for the outlets, and it's also possible to make them select the most prestigious journals in the fields from the international perspective. And this also goes for the publishers. And this is how the points are given. And then if a publication is related to more than one institution, the points are divided among them. But there may be a factor multiplier for international authorship. And then there are some variants in the other countries. I'll just show you. Our model was implemented in 2005, and Flanders implemented the supplementing database by inspiration from the Norwegian model, but they did not distinguish between levels 1 and 2. And then Denmark implemented the model in 2009, just with a few modifications. And Sweden implemented the Web of Science-based model, but as I showed you, the universities reacted by using local variants. And Finland is implementing the model next year. And Portugal has now, half a year ago, decided to develop the same model and go through the Portuguese publications. First, they looked at Web of Science as the data source. There was a lot of discussion. Then they looked at Scopus because it has wider coverage of any country's research. Scopus will have a wider coverage. We can discuss this afterwards, but it's the same incomplete picture, especially in the humanities, social sciences, and engineering sciences still. So they also decided to use the current research information system. The evaluation then. What have been the effects? What have been the problems? It was evaluated in Norway, but by a Danish research team, and the evaluation was commissioned then by the Norwegian Association of Higher Education Institutions, which is running the model in Norway. But the evaluation was financed then by the ministry, and it was based on surveys to large part of Norwegian researchers and to interviews with key persons on all levels, and then with bibliometrics. And it has a 30-page summary in English, so you can find it on the web. The results so far show quite an increase, and this is only the higher education sector, in the publication rate. And the evaluation found, while the amount of publications on level 2 has been stable on 20%. But it also means that there are twice as many publications on the higher level now than there was 10 years ago. And they found that this increase could partly be explained, of course, by increased funding during these years, but only partly. They also found that, and this is referring to the non-active researchers, that was a question about here. They found that many more researchers are now active in Norwegian research, in fact 3 times as many as 10 years ago. Now this is by a more independent measurement, the share of articles for these countries in the Web of Science since 1980. Now generally the trend, the downgoing trend for Sweden after 2000 is typical of most Western countries, because China, India, and so on are coming up with increased shares. In this period, China went from being the 15th largest country to the 2nd largest country, measured by shares of the Web of Science publications. But you can see some effects of the introduction of bibliometric models in all instances here, except in Finland, when they have not implemented any model yet. Norway had a problem 10 years ago with too many inactive researchers that by law were supposed to do research. So our productivity compared to our neighboring countries was lower. But now we are at about the same level, if you relate these numbers, figures, to size of the country in research. So the main results they found was that there was increased publishing beyond increased funding during the period, that an increased number of researchers are publishing, that publication patterns remain stable, so book publishing does not go away. The language, the publications in Norwegian language still continue to be there, and of course they are also included in the model. The quality does not go up or down. Citation rates and share of publications at level 2 are stable. That's on the national level. But there are 3 major problems. The weighting model, the balance between major fields. It was supposed to be neutral, but we will have to redo it because it now is balancing more towards the social science and humanities than towards the natural sciences, health sciences and engineering. And this is because of the fractioning in case of multi-authorship. So that's one problem we have to solve. It needs to be neutral because the institutions in the higher education sector have different research profiles. So we have technical universities, we have agricultural universities, and they need to be balanced against the general universities in a proper way. Then there's the transparency and legitimacy of the nomination process. We need to do a lot about that. We need to increase transparency to have information in the same place for all the panels, where their decisions are visible and also the reasons they give for the decisions. And then there's the local use of the model. When you have an indicator on the national level, of course it's easy to use it at the faculty or within a department, although it was not designed to be part of the evaluation of individuals. And that can be an abuse, of course. The decision is that it will continue with increased economic weight after this evaluation. So our present government thinks that it is a good idea to continue after all. And this ends my presentation, but you're welcome to discuss, of course.
Thank you very much.